Do we have our online people back in the room? We do. Welcome back, online people. Woohoo! Welcome, welcome. Come on in.
The camera's back there if you want to wave.
Yes, wave. Yes. So this is the forum on Article 2. If that's what you thought you were coming to, you have come to the right thing. All right. Welcome. Come on in. All right. Whew. We'll begin with a chalice lighting. These words are by Eric Walker Wickstrom. Why we're here. Here, today, in this place and with these people, may we listen so that we can hear. May we hear so that we can feel. May we feel so that we can know. And may we know so that we can change ourselves and this world. May this chalice we light our way. So welcome. I'm Reverend Sara Lewis. I use she, her pronouns. And this is a forum for today about Article 2 of the UUA bylaws. And this is the second forum that we've held on this topic. So some of you may have seen our previous forum in November or not. And that is fine, either way. Whatever state of having followed this that you are bringing to today is welcome here, whether this is the first time you've even heard about it or whether you've been following along this process for a long time. Welcome.
Thank you, Sarah. So just a word about how we got here. And I'm going to go back to what is this thing that we're even talking about. So the Unitarian Universalist Association, the UUA, is the collection of UU congregations from around the country. We covenant to be in the association together to support each other. The bylaws of the UUA are the legal document that lay out how we relate to each other as member congregations of the UUA. And Article 2 of the bylaws is the part of the bylaws that says what the purpose of the UUA is and what our principles are. What is it that brings us together? All right, you with me so far? Okay, so Article 2 is a part of the bylaws that the bylaws intentionally address and say that the Article 2 of the bylaws are supposed to be revisited every 15 years. And that's based on the fact that we are a living tradition. We change over time. And the thinking was that our principles and purposes will change over time as we change and grow. And so a few years ago, it was time for that 15-year cycle to begin again. And the board of the UUA gave a charge to the Article 2 Commission, created a commission, gave them a charge to revisit Article 2, our principles and purposes, and see if there were changes that needed to be made. And the charge that the board gave to the commission was quite broad and invited them to consider all of the changes that have been proposed to our principles, as well as our work for anti-racism to create a multicultural, anti-oppressive, anti-racist organization. And that was the charge that this group was given. So the Article 2 has changed over time. The principles and purposes as we know them now were created in the 1980s. There was a proposal to change the Article 2 principles in 2010, and it did not pass. And that was the last time that there was any review or revision looked at for Article 2. So I would encourage you to look at the report that just came out from the commission. It lays out all the steps that they took. Reverend Sara did a great job of putting on a slide, which you can see up here, tech team, if you'll pull up the slide with the timeline, there we go. So this was the timeline of what's happened. In the fall of 2020, the Article 2 Study Commission was formed and got to work. They were appointed at the General Assembly in 2020, which is in June. In the spring of 2021, they started their panels and they started collecting surveys. And then in General Assembly of 2021, which is June, they introduced a session in General Assembly. They collected more information. They were very present in that General Assembly, which was online, of course, because of COVID. In the fall, there were congregational resources developed so that congregations could have conversation about the Article 2 changes. In the winter and spring of 2021, there were focus groups online. There were interviews and surveys. Part of the charge to the commission was that the commission was to intentionally and specifically reach out to many groups that are affiliated with the UUA, and particularly the groups that are collections of people who identify on the margins. So Blue, Black Lives UU was one of those, and some other organizations. At GA in 2022, which was just last June, there was draft language shared, and then since then they've had sharing. In the fall when we did this forum, it was the first draft. We're doing this forum now based on the draft that was just released last month. Then going forward, this winter and spring, there will be lots of regional forums and many assemblies and opportunities for input and conversation. And then at General Assembly this year, which will be in Pittsburgh and online in June, there will be, right now there's planned to be a vote. Now there's 2 votes that have to happen, one this year and one next year. And the vote is by delegates from congregations. So our polity says that every congregation in the association has delegates based on their membership. So because we have just over 300 members, you get 1 delegate for every 50 members. OUUC has 7 delegates because we have just over 300 members. So we have 7 people who can go to General Assembly and vote on behalf of the congregation. The delegates will vote on the proposed changes to Article 2, both this year and next year. And then, as I say, again, at General Assembly in 2024, there will be a second vote, assuming that it passes the first time. And that's the plan for this timeline. You can see that this is a multi-year process. It's not something that happens quickly. And I will say that this process is the most inclusive process that I have ever experienced in the UUA for looking at changes of this kind. And I just want to share with you some numbers from the report that the Commission put out last month. Over the course of its work, the Commission engaged in 45 feedback sessions with 4,611 total participants. Their videos reached 7,765 viewers, and the 29 surveys generated a total of 10,925 responses. This was not a process that has been secret or that was kept from folks participating. Now, I will also admit that this process has happened in a really challenging time with COVID and online and not, and lots of other things happening. And even with that, there's been extensive participation in this. So as Reverend Sara mentioned, we did a forum on this in, I think it was November or December, somewhere in there. You know, time is wonky with COVID. And Reverend Sara put together a Padlet. That's just a platform for sharing information. We'll share the link for that, and it's also in Reverend Sara's Spark article from a couple weeks ago. It's got all of the Article 2 information collected all together. So some writing that we've done, a link to the proposed draft, a link to the forum that we did, and some other things that might be of interest if you want to engage in this a little bit more. So what we want to do now is read through the draft. We've got that on a slide, and we'll read it out loud so you can see it and hear it. We know that we need lots of ways to bring things into our awareness. The draft does not have the 7 principles or the 8 principles, if you prefer that, or the 6 sources, but the concepts are there. What the draft does have is 7 values. Would you like to start, Sarah?
Yes, so I'll start with section C21, purposes. The Unitarian Universalist Association will devote its resources to and use its organizational powers for religious, educational, and humanitarian purposes. Its primary purposes are to assist congregations in their vital ministries, support and train leaders, both lay and professional, to foster lifelong faith formation, to heal historic injustices, and to advance our Unitarian Universalist values in the world. The purpose of the Unitarian Universalist Association is to actively engage its members in the transformation of the world through liberating love.
That's a big thing, isn't it? So the next section is values and covenant. As Unitarian Universalists, we covenant congregation to congregation and through our association to support and assist one another in our ministries. We draw from our heritage of freedom, reason, hope, and courage, building on the foundation of love. Love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. Inseparable from one another, let's have the next slide that I think is the graphic of the tulip. Yeah. Inseparable from one another, these shared values are interdependence, equity, transformation, pluralism, generosity, and justice. And at the center of all that is love.
We are going to read the specific for each value, and if it doesn't make sense after that, then we'll come back.
When questions are asked from the audience, if they're not amplified, can you restate the question?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that reminder. So the question was, can we define pluralism? And the answer that I gave was that we're going to read through the definitions that are in the draft language, and then we'll come back for further definition if needed. So the first of the values that we'll read the statement on is interdependence. Interdependence. We honor the interdependent web of all existence. We covenant to cherish Earth and all beings by creating and nurturing relationships of care and respect. With humility and reverence, we acknowledge our place in the great web of life, and we work to repair harm and damaged relationships.
Pluralism is next. We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. So pluralism is celebrating our differences, is how I would frame that, Lynn. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect.
And the next one is justice. We work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. We support the use of inclusive democratic processes to make decisions.
Transformation is next. We adapt to the changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritage, never complete and never perfect.
Generosity. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. We covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, presence, and resources. Our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality.
So you'll notice that with each of these values, there's a statement of action, and then there's a covenantal statement after that. So the last one is equity. We declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities.
And next we have section C2.3, inspirations. This is where the 6 sources were previously. So inspirations. As Unitarian Universalists, we use and are inspired by sacred and secular understandings that help us to live into our values. We respect the histories, contexts, and cultures in which they were created and are currently practiced. These sources ground us and sustain us in ordinary, difficult, and joyous times. Grateful for the religious ancestries we inherit and the diversity which enriches our faith, we are called to ever deepen and expand our wisdom.
The next section is inclusion. Systems of power, privilege, and oppression have traditionally created barriers for persons and groups with particular identities, ages, abilities, and histories. We pledge to replace such barriers with ever-widening circles of solidarity and mutual respect. We strive to be an association of congregations that truly welcome all persons who share our values. We commit to being an association of congregations that empowers and enhances everyone's participation, especially those with historically marginalized identities.
And then the last section, freedom of belief. Congregational freedom and the individual's right of conscience are central to our Unitarian Universalist heritage. Congregations may establish statements of purpose, covenants, and bonds of union, so long as they do not require that members adhere to a particular creed.
So that's the draft. It's significantly different from the 7 principles and the 6 sources. There's a couple things I would just note. One is, for those of us who came to this faith tradition under the 7 principles and the 6 sources, it's giving up something. I just want to acknowledge it's giving up, what may have drawn us. And in some ways, it's easy. So do you get this question, if you ever are in a conversation, well, do you go to church? Where do you go to church? Yeah, you. Well, what do you believe? It's easy to say the 7 principles, right? It might be a little bit harder to say this. And what we've noticed over time is that the 7 principles have been spoken about as if they were our creed. And we are a creedless denomination, which is just the first thing that's hard for folks to understand in a nation that was, colonized with Christianity, and you're told what to believe. And so instead of what do you believe, I start the conversation by answering that question with, we don't tell people what to believe. That's the conversation, not the 7 principles. The other thing that I'll say is, this is not without controversy. What a surprise. So, and there are some groups that are really, really angry and upset about this proposal. I haven't seen it because I'm not on Facebook, but Reverend Sara says there's a Save the 7 Principles group out there. And there are rumors abound. I heard just this morning that there's a rumor that the UUA is going to take over all of the congregations and take away their buildings. You can laugh, but that's out there. It's out there. And what I will say and remind us all is that changing our principles and purposes, which is going to go before the delegates of congregations, does not change our congregational polity. We have hundreds of years of history of congregations being able to determine their own path and call their own ministers and ordain their own ministers and all those things, have their own budgets in their buildings. That is not going to change, and this is not going to change that. So, anything you would add to that, Reverend Sara?
No, no. You said it with great power. It's
So what we thought we might do is offer you the opportunity for some conversation amongst yourselves. And so the idea was for the folks online to create some breakout rooms, depending on how many there are, for a conversation. And for the folks here, if you would want to get into groups of 5 or 6, we've got some hard copies of the proposal, the proposed language for you to have in front of you. And to just consider some questions like, what's your reaction? What's your initial reaction? What do you like or love? Is anything missing? And do you have any questions? So Carbon has his hand up. There's a question.
There's a question online.
Oh, okay. Should we take some questions first then, and then we can think about small groups? So what's the online question?
I can do it.
Oh, would like to speak? Okay.
You can also open chat.
Okay, can I speak now? My picture is lightened up. Can you hear me? Okay, the first question I have, Mary, you talked about the process that UUA and its multiple committees have gone through to get to this point. My question is you talked about our 7 delegates. What's our process to instruct our 7 delegates who will be going to GA this year?
Good.
Great question, Jim, and you've anticipated the end of this meeting, which is to ask if there are people who would be interested in being delegates. I will say that in my time here, we've never sent 7 delegates, although we have asked every single year. And I understand from Reverend Sara and others that there hasn't been a formal process here for choosing delegates and preparing delegates. And that is super important this year. It's important every year, and it's really important this year. So that's why we started this process last fall, to begin the education of this is what's coming, this is why it's important. Today we'll ask if folks are interested in being delegates to speak with me or Reverend Sara. And then our plan is to have some time with the delegates to talk about what's coming. And then perhaps for the delegates to be in a forum like this to ask the congregation so that our delegates truly are representing OUUC. And as I understand it, that will be the first time that's ever happened here. Wow. Does that answer your question, Jim?
So I would just like to suggest that we do plan to have time for open Q&A, but I think we're never going to get to our small group time together if we continue to take questions. So could I ask that if folks have clarifying questions that need to be answered before a small group discussion, that you ask those, but if you have further process questions, save them till after a little small group conversation. Does that make sense?
Sounds great.
All right, so Elizabeth, hold on.
For the small group discussion, it would help to have a copy of the 7 principles also, so we can compare the two.
It's all in the document. So the report that the commission put out has what is currently in place and what's proposed both.
I just have a quick question about something that's gone from this, that would be no longer in this document that were in the 7 principles. So at least in the sources part of the principles, there was a reference to Christianity, and that has disappeared, and it's replaced with a more general language, which also was in the sources. So what can I glean anything from that? Because it seems to me, for a number of people, and I would include myself in that, for whom some Christian heritage with Unitarianism is important, that seems to be a little bit of a, maybe not an insult, but there's something missing there.
Okay.
And I think it may be important to some people, so I wonder what's the background of that deletion?
Sure, sure. And I would just say that the current sources list 6 things, including Christianity and Judaism, all kinds of things, and none of them are there anymore. And there's some reasons for that which we can certainly talk about and clarify. And mostly, the biggest one is misappropriation, cultural appropriation, misusing things that are not ours. So yeah, we can talk more about that, but it's a big deal.
I just also want to add that specifically to that, Jeff, in the General Assembly sessions in which this was discussed, it was really lifted up that anytime you start to make a list, you risk leaving someone off it. And that there was no intention of demoting any particular source by having a more generalized statement of them all.
Any other clarifying questions before we go into some small groups? And then we'll take general questions after that. Some may come up in your groups. Okay. So online folks, will leave it to the tech team to offer you some breakout rooms with a link to the report if that's possible. And then for folks here, you can gather here in the sanctuary. You could gather out in the commons if you wanted. And Reverend Sara has the paper reports if you would like some.
And how much time are we giving people?
Shall we say 20 after? That's about 15 minutes.
Paper reports here if you want one.
Yes, please. Do we have some leaders who will come and get a report and raise your hand for folks to gather around them?
Yeah.
Arlene is one.
So Arlene
is one.
has one copy and we'll take one group.
It's in the document. It's in the section where I was speaking at the beginning. Yep. It's in today's folder, tech team.
You take a group and talk about it.
Polity. Yes. It's a fancy word. Can I go online ourselves? How do I have to go there?
Oh, yeah, no, online.
And there are a couple ways that churches organize and have the polity. One is a model like the Catholic Church. The Pope decides. It's a very hierarchical, the power lies with the Pope, the bishops, the cardinals, and individual parishes don't have much power at all. In our denomination, it's congregational polity, and congregations have a lot of power. We don't have a pope, we don't have cardinals, we don't have bishops. Does that help? Thank you for asking, and I'll clarify that as well.
Somewhere else?
Did you find it? Yes, I linked to the polity. Yeah. I'm sorry, that wasn't very clear. It made perfect sense to me.
As philosophical, theological groups, humanists, Christians, etc. So they do reach out to the philosophical groups as well. Eighth principle and first principle advocates, past GA attendees, these people are the ones most likely to be voting on proposed principles. Commission on Change, Journey Towards Holiness, former leaders who have left the faith, i.e. those who left because they were harmed, unchurched UUs who still identify as UUs but don't belong to UU congregations, i.e. those who just don't feel compelled to be members of the UU congregation, members of the Commission on Appraisal, UU staff, UU seminaries, of UU Service Committee, and UU issues groups such as UU Earth Justice Ministry, UUs for Justice in the Middle East, etc. So they talked to a big group, there was huge, there's a whole page of stakeholders. They talked to whoever you used who left the faith and unchurched you used who still identified but don't belong to the congregation.
What about identity groups?
These are all you.
Oh, they are.
You humanists, you Christians. All right, and then the resolution, the approach. Seven, it says 7 single word values, each with a short sentence of explication, are easier to remember and use as touchstones in our conversations, in congregational governance, and in educational settings. It says, for some, the current principles also serve as a theological statement, a personal code of ethics, and a way to evangelize by explaining who we are. For all those reasons, we felt we would be better served by a structure in which we articulate our shared values and then use these values as the ground for aspirational statements of action. I know, personally, I always felt it was difficult.
It is time to come back together. Tech team, if you could bring back our online folks. I'm sure that wasn't enough time because this could be a really juicy conversation, but please do return. So now we will do whole group question and answer, just as a reminder so that we can have participation between online and in the room. If you are in the room and want to ask a question, please wait till we get to you with the microphone. And tech team, let us know if folks online have questions. You've got one now? All right, well, let's start with the person online then.
Jim.
I guess you need to hit OK.
Okay, now I've been unmuted. Thank you. Emily made a significant point. Emily, my wife, Emily Ray, who's probably one of the most senior of our congregation, and wanted
Good cheer.
to specifically let everybody know that in the olden days, we did have a process of discussions of changes of UU national things that were discussed, and the congregation actually paid for part of the expenses of the delegates to go to the association meetings. Did I cover that right, Emily?
Not all paid for. It's needed that were paid for, and the congregation as a whole discussed the proposals to be discussed at GA before they went, and reported back fully afterwards.
Process was in place at one point, so thank you for sharing that. Thank you, Emily, for being our historian as well in remembering our OUC history. Yeah.
And I would just say that those of you who have been around for a while know that during Arthur Vaney's ministry with you, the congregation exploded in size. And so there were all kinds of things that come with a size transition. And I suspect that, well, how do we do GA and how do we have these discussions and such was one of those things that got lost somewhere along the way. And then, of course, there was all the transition. So here we are back again, having the opportunity to recreate how we come together in connection with the other UU congregations around the country.
All right, do we have another question, either online or in the room? All right, I'm going to take one in the room.
I wasn't present in November, but I did listen to the recording. And there's a phrase in the inclusion section that says, "We truly welcome all persons who share our values." And you had remarked, and please correct me if I've misinterpreted, that we do sometimes have to exclude people due to problematic, I don't know the words you used, but it can be the case that someone can arrive who's not willing to participate in a way that furthers our sense of who we are as a people. But I would think myself that that would be done based on behavior, because I don't know how you can tell, say what is your value. It sounds like a creedal test. So that's disturbing to me, and I came up with all kinds of things from this free and responsible search for truth in meeting. Are we, looking for true believers? How does this support transformation? saying that we're only welcome people who share our current values, right? How is that fostering lifelong faith formation if we're saying, if you don't currently share our values, we're not explicitly welcoming you?
Sure. Thank you. That's a really important point. And what I would say is, yes, when it doesn't happen very often that someone is excluded from a UU congregation. And in all the instances that I know of from my colleagues, it's because of behavior. Because our behavior expresses our values, whether we acknowledge it or not. So what we truly believe comes out in how we behave in the world. So yes, and we have a big tent. We have one of the biggest tents of any faith denomination, but it's not infinite, is what I would say. So folks who behave in ways that are hateful, that behavior isn't welcome, and we invite them to change, and if they can't or won't, then that's a different conversation.
And I'll just say that I would be comfortable with a different form of language than this that expresses what you just said.
Great. So feedback to the Article 2 Commission then for any changes. I didn't see is there still a place on the website, do you know, for feedback to them?
I'll look, I'm not sure.
Yeah, we can sure let you know, because it's the commission that's going to finalize this and bring it to General Assembly. Although this may be the draft that goes. It doesn't mean it won't get wordsmithed, but yeah.
Another question online or in person? None online, okay. Yeah. One online, okay. I'm going to take the one in the room first.
Yes, in our small group, it was expressed that in this diagram, love being at the center was kind of a concern because love is not really defined. How do you define love? And are all of these spokes around the circle, the things that are in here, interdependence, equity, transformation, pluralism, generosity, justice. So if we hold those values and express those values in our relations with people, does that mean love? Are we loving because we're doing all these, we're sharing all these other values with them? And, so anyway, I don't know if you can enlighten us on that.
Elizabeth, that's a wonderful theological question. It is.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental theological question. And what I would suggest is, Cornel West said, justice is love in action. All of those spokes are love in action. But what a wonderful conversation it would be to talk about love. And I'll tell you, so Reverend Sara and I in these next few months will be looking at our planning for next year and such. Guess what our monthly themes are going to be next year? Yeah. Yep, all of the 7 values. So we'll have some opportunities to explore those in this year to come.
So then we had a question online.
All right, you can go ahead, Alex.
There you go. All right. It's not a question, but so much as a perspective, and one of the ways that I was introduced to UU. I was raised Baptist, Southern Baptist / Christian nationalism. And so one of the first interactions that I had with UU was seeing a man that had put food and water in the desert for on the Mexican border for people crossing into the United States, and he was arrested. And he was found not guilty based on his religious beliefs, using UU as his defense. And so religion, the right to religion right now in America is defending racism. And that's what, to me, UU is the antithesis to the systemic racism, to all of that, what's happening. And that part of what this statement is can we use this in court? How is the statement in court for us to use our religious belief system as a defense? And as an environmental activist, I don't have a lawn, but I have an HOA, and the HOA doesn't like my not a lawn. And so I was able to use UU as an argument against my HOA, and I still have my not a lawn that they don't like. But because I was able to say, you know, this is my religious beliefs, it's in my religious belief system statements, like here's this, the 7 principles, that's part of how we're able to use and define ourselves, is like, how can we use that in the system? If that makes sense.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's always wonderful to have your contribution and to see you online.
And I would just add that, yeah, that makes great sense and is a very pragmatic, in a way, reason for a statement of common belief or a definition of our shared UU values. But yeah, there's many, many times that you may need or want to define Unitarian Universalism to others. I've taught the class Articulating Your Faith many times here in the congregation, and we struggle with, like, you know, if somebody is asking you, what is a Unitarian Universalist? How do you answer? This new proposed language gives us new ways to answer, definitions that we can call upon, which aren't necessarily binding on us, but are a description that we can use as we discuss Unitarian Universalism.
So I'm very new to the UU ideas, and I actually am in favor of removing any references directly to specific religions, or even sort of indirectly to specific religions. But what I notice in the new wording is what it makes me think about is, what about the ways that traditional established religions have actually acted in ways that are in opposition to our values, and that doesn't seem to be reflected in the new statement at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what a great observation. And you know, my first response would be, one of the criticisms that UUs get is that we start with what we're not. Right? We're not Christian, and we're not Jewish, and we're not this, and we're not that. And I am pretty sure that the Article 2 Commission brought into their work, what are we? The statement of what are we? So instead of saying what we're not, let's say what we are. So there's some history behind your observation, for sure. So Reverend Sara has a youth group to get to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I would love to jump to what comes next. So what comes next? As we said, we have 7 delegate spots. And if you are interested in being a delegate, GA, General Assembly, is in Pittsburgh this year, but you don't have to go to Pittsburgh. As we have learned with Zoom and all of our time through COVID-19, distance platforms are pretty good these days. So you can register to attend General Assembly online, and that registration allows you to also go to all the other programming. Or you can be a business-only delegate. Business-only delegates, there's no charge, and you don't get access to all of the other programming, but you do get all of the voting and the business. So, so there's many ways to be a delegate. You could go to Pittsburgh in person. You can do the whole thing online with the rest of the programming, workshops and worship services and business, or you can be a delegate for just business. And there is financial assistance available for online registration if that's something you're interested in. Let us know. And we will be having some more congregational meetings so that our delegates truly are representing OUUC. So talk to me or Reverend Mary if you're interested in being a delegate this year.
And just so you have dates if you're interested, it's June 21st to 25th. General Assembly starts on a Wednesday evening and goes through Sunday at about noon. Yeah. So Reverend Sarah's going to go to the youth group. I'll stick around if anyone wants to chat with me for a little bit. And so we'll close and extinguish our chalice. These words are from Melissa Jetter. We extinguish this chalice today, but we are illuminated by a faith that allows us to sit and think. In this quiet time, we can reflect, meditating on love and growing out of our comfort. And though we experience discomfort, we are excited to give birth to a new, just world. Thank you for showing up.
Thank you. Thank you.